The jungle breathed in silence, a stillness so profound that even the leaves dared not whisper. Morning mist curled between the towering ferns, clinging to the earth like ancient secrets refusing to rise. In that heavy hush, a boy moved, small, barefoot, and alone. He looked no older than 10, though his eyes, sharp and unreadable, carried a weight that age could not measure. Dirt caked his skin. His shirt hung in tatters, and a sling of hand-woven fibers crossed his chest, holding what little he possessed. Every step he took was deliberate, silent, as if each patch of moss were familiar, like the palm of his own hand. Above him, a pair of golden eyes blinked through the foliage. Then another, and another. They watched him, 3 juvenile raptors, all sinew and scale, barely taller than the boy but armed with claws that could tear bark from trees. They followed his path, mocking him with shrill, chirping giggles. "Flesh walker," one hissed in their tongue. "He walks upright like he's one of us." "He smells of rot fruit and fear," another added. The boy said nothing. He didn't flinch. He didn't look up. Mockery had long since become background noise, less dangerous than falling branches, less real than the ache in his limbs at day's end. He continued forward, navigating around a tree trunk twice his width, when one of the raptors leapt down in front of him, blocking his path with a snarl and a stomp. The boy finally stopped. They expected a scream, maybe a run for the bushes. Instead, the boy met the beast's eyes. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he inhaled deep and slow, and let out a sound so low it barely registered at first. It wasn't a word. It was a growl. Primitive, measured, and wrong. It didn't belong in a human throat. The lead raptor recoiled slightly, pupils dilating. The other 2 crept forward, unsure now. Something old stirred in the back of their inherited memory. That sound, that command. The boy stepped closer, unblinking. The raptor stepped aside. He passed through them like wind through reeds. Not a glance back, not a wasted breath. They didn't follow. Deeper in the jungle, the boy climbed a rock slope where the canopy thinned, exposing the early sun like a golden wound across the sky. From here, he could see the clearing, a sacred stretch of land that no creature dared claim. It belonged to something older, something unspeakable. That was where he was going. His name was forgotten, at least to the others. He didn't speak it, didn't write it. He wasn't even sure if he still had one. The only voice that mattered now belonged to the one who had raised him. They had come together like fire and storm. He remembered flashes, screams, metal, smoke, a crash in the jungle, then silence, and something vast bending the branches above him, teeth the size of his fingers, eyes like glowing coals. Death, he thought, in the moment before it changed him. But death did not come. Instead, the creature had watched, observed, then turned away, and he had followed. Over time, he learned its moods, its feeding habits, its paths. He mimicked the deep clicks it made while sleeping, the hunting roars it loosed at dusk. At first, the mimicry was simple survival, making himself less alien to the jungle. But eventually it became something more. He learned its language, its rhythm, its will. The dinosaurs mocked him, but the jungle knew. The vines moved aside for him. The insects never bit. Even the breeze seemed to bend his favor when the heat grew too cruel. He was no ruler, not yet, but he was becoming something. In the heart of the clearing, the air thickened with silence, not the passive quiet of morning, but an alertness, a pause in breath before revelation. The boy knelt and pressed his hand into the soil. It was warm, vibrating. He closed his eyes and whispered, not words, but tones, pulses, a cadence he had learned through repetition and reverence. The earth answered. From the edge of the trees, branches cracked. A distant rhythmic thud followed, steady and deep, like the beat of a war drum beneath the skin of the world. The apex predator emerged, and the jungle fell to its knees. Massive, ancient, and terrible in its elegance, it moved with a grace that belied its size. Each footstep shattered branches, yet the beast's eyes, burning gold rimmed in black, were calm, wise, focused. It stopped in front of the boy. The boy didn't move. Neither did the beast. Then, Slowly, the predator lowered its head, nostrils flaring. The boy raised one hand, not in fear, but in greeting, and touched the hardened ridge between its eyes. To any watching creature, this moment was impossible. The beast that had raised herds and shattered skulls bowed to a human child, and the child bowed in return, not in submission, but in understanding. Elsewhere, in the hidden courts of scaled rulers and horned advisors, word of the strange human had begun to spread. They scoffed at first, calling it a jungle myth, a trick of vines and shadows. But now, even the elders whispered his approach like a warning. If the apex had chosen him, it meant change. It meant war. It meant reckoning. Back in the clearing, the beast lifted its head. The boy stepped forward and climbed onto its back with the ease of one who had done it many times before. Together, they turned toward the horizon where smoke from an unknown fire curled into the sky. A signal. A threat. The boy narrowed his eyes, the wind pushing back his hair, and let out a low, echoing call that merged with the predator's roar. It was a sound of belonging, of challenge, and the jungle listened. The leaves whispered again, no longer in mockery, but in anticipation. The air thickened as they crossed into the deeper jungle. The canopy above knotted so tightly that sunlight came only in shards. Shadows moved with intent here, not carried by the wind but by memory, old, heavy things that had not forgotten the boy's presence. He rode barebacked on the massive predator's shoulders, his legs tucked close against the beast's armored hide. They moved as one. Below them, creatures parted like waves before a storm tide. Even the more daring carnivores, those with teeth enough to challenge others for dominance, shrunk from view. It wasn't just the size of the beast that drew fear. It was something more primal, etched into the bones of the jungle, the roarless command of an ancient king. He was called many things by those who dared speak of him. Ghostclaw, the last ember. But the boy had no name for him, no need for one. Their bond was not one of labels. It was blood deep, wordless. Each night, the boy curled beside the creature's rib cage and listened to its breathing, as steady and encompassing as the sea. As a baby, he'd known only fear and loss. Now he knew presence, protection, and, somewhere deeper, purpose. He had not spoken human language in years. He had no need for it. His thoughts moved in soundless roars and gestures, shaped by the way the king blinked, the way his tail curved, the rhythm of his breath. This was how he'd learned to communicate, not through syllables but through instinct, mimicry, and survival. But their peace was not shared. The council of claw and scale had gathered. In the stone basin deep within the canyon, raptors, horned elders, and long-necked sentries convened, and they were afraid, not of the beast, for they had known his reign, but of what walked beside him now. The human, he mimics power, hissed the raptor matriarch, her feathers raised in disgust. He is a skin-born nothing. His spine is soft. No, rumbled Stegosaur, his plates quivering. He commands it. That is what makes him dangerous. An aberration, croaked an ancient triceratops. Beasts do not bow to man. This one forgets who is predator and who is prey. A younger alpha stood, scales still polished by youth. Then let us remind him. They agreed, not with words, they rarely did, but with the silence that followed, the kind of silence that always preceded the breaking of bone. The boy, unaware of the council's motion, continued deeper into the territories where no beast dared hunt. The land here was ash-choked, scarred by ancient fire. The king slowed his pace, eyes scanning the undergrowth. They had not returned here since the battle that had nearly cost him his life. And it was here the boy first heard it, a rustle not of leaves but of intention. He slid down the predator's flank, landing lightly on the blackened earth. His fingers brushed the dirt. No tremor, no call, but he could feel it in the air, anticipation, breath held behind teeth. He raised his hand, flat, steady, the signal to wait. The king froze, motionless. The first attack came fast. A blur of sinew and talon, jaws stretched wide, eyes burning with fervor. The boy sidestepped, agile as wind, and let out a sharp bark, not of fear but command. The king responded instantly, a tail swing cleaving the attacker mid-leap, and sending its remains into the trees. But more followed. From every direction, claws scraped bark and teeth snapped through air. Dozens of challengers, all younger alphas, poured from the brush with hunger in their eyes and rebellion in their bones. The king roared, a sound that shattered the stillness and cracked the canopy above. Birds scattered. Smaller creatures fled. But the attackers did not. They had tasted too much fear already. Now they were drunk on it. The boy moved not behind the king, but beside him. Every muscle in his body coiled with focus. He no longer mimicked the predator. He anticipated him. Each movement was part of a rhythm, a call and answer older than language. When the king lunged left, the boy circled right. When the tail swept low, the boy leapt. They danced through chaos with deadly grace. But numbers had weight. The king bled, a gash along his side, deep enough to leave muscle torn and bone exposed. He staggered just once, but the boy saw it. And in that moment, something inside him changed. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He called. The sound that erupted from his throat was not human, not mimicry. It was something else. A roar imbued with all he had learned, all he had endured. It echoed with grief, power, defiance, and something deeper still. Claim. The jungle answered. The call was not for reinforcements. It was a declaration, a statement that something new had emerged. Not a beast, not a man, but both. A bridge between two bloodlines, forged in survival and hardened by silence. The attackers faltered. Some paused mid-charge. Others lowered their heads, uncertain. The bond they had seen, the boy and the king moving as one, was no longer blasphemy. It was command, authority, unshakable. The king stood taller, though blood ran freely from his wounds. He bared his teeth, and this time the challengers understood. This would not be a victory. It would be a reckoning. The survivors fled. Only the bodies remained, twisted and broken, proof of the line that had been drawn. When it was over, the king collapsed to one side, breath labored. The boy knelt beside him, hand pressed to his snout. The creature's eye blinked once, slowly, as if affirming something. Not goodbye, not yet, but acceptance. The boy did not cry. He had no use for tears. Instead, he leaned forward and whispered, not in words, but in breath and hums, a sound only the king would recognize. Rest. The jungle waited, holding its breath. Those who had watched in secret did not return to the council. They had seen enough. What walked among them now was not an anomaly. It was a sovereign, and though the king still lived, wounded and weary, it was a boy who stood tall, the one who had called, the one who had been answered. Far above them, dark clouds began to gather. The boy looked skyward, jaw clenched. There were others who would not understand, but they would learn. Night fell heavy and fast, like a curtain drawn with fury across the sky. Thunder growled in the distance, echoing across the ridgelines and weaving itself through the jungle canopy. The boy stood motionless atop a stone ledge, his silhouette outlined by the flickering orange glow of scattered fires in the valley below. His bare feet gripped the wet rock, rain sliding down his face like the touch of something ancient and patient. Behind him, in the shadows of the towering trees, the wounded king slept, fitfully, his breath rattling through lungs carved by age and battle. Far below, the valley had changed. Where once only beasts had ruled, now structures rose. Human ones, with lattices, metal fences, humming towers with blinking lights. Alien things that hummed with defiance. A settlement, not temporary, not a scientific outpost or a hunting party. It was an invasion dressed as civilization. They had returned. He remembered them in fragments. Faces behind glass. Cold hands pulling at him. Voices loud and clipped. His earliest memories were lined with their scents. Disinfectant, rubber, oil. They had claimed him, studied him, then lost him in the wild like a coin dropped into the ocean. And now they were back, unknowingly encroaching upon land bound not by law, but by blood. He descended the ledge in silence, blending with the mist, his body already soaked through. The animals of the jungle had begun to stir, uneasy beneath the unfamiliar vibrations carried by the machines. The boy could feel their confusion, their fear. For generations, the jungle had taught its rhythm: hunt, flee, eat, rest. But these new sounds had no rhythm, only disruption. As he passed beneath a root arch, two juvenile raptors appeared, their eyes wide and uncertain. They chirped nervously, sending oil on the wind. Many-legged walkers, one whispered in its tongue. They dig without claws. They build nests with no heat, said the other. The boy crouched and looked them in the eyes. He didn't speak, but they understood. He pressed his palm into the dirt, then smeared a long streak across a stone, an ancient sign, a warning. They blinked, then vanished into the trees. He continued toward the valley. At the forest edge, he paused. The boundary between the wild and the built world was stark. Here, grass died in perfect lines. Here, the trees stopped, not because of nature's cycle, but because of machines. The boy squatted low and studied the outer perimeter. Electric lights pulsed in intervals, accompanied by sharp zaps from hidden wires. Beyond them, humans moved in predictable patterns. Uniforms, tools, guns. He watched the group gathered around a massive display, its screen alight with topography and blinking red dots. They pointed at the mountain ranges. They had no idea how close they already were. A young man in a vest gestured at a map. We clear-cut Section 5 tomorrow. Phase 2 starts next week. Another nodded. And the traps? In place. Anything bigger than a boar trips the alarm. They laughed. One lit a cigarette. Smoke curled upward and disappeared into the rain. The boy's fingers curled into the earth. He didn't hate them. Not fully. Not yet. But he knew they didn't belong here. Not anymore. The jungle had made its choice. Behind him, leaves shifted. The king was awake. He emerged slowly from the shadows, limping but upright, every movement measured, full of old strength burning through pain. His eyes caught the lights. A low growl rolled from his throat, not loud but final. They stood side by side, boy and beast, staring down into the artificial valley. Neither moved, neither needed to. When the first alarm blared, it was not because of an attack. It was a silence. No birds, no insects, no frogs, just a void. Then the trees moved. Creatures poured from the jungle in a wave. Raptors, stegosaurs, horned titans, and long-clawed shadows that had never once appeared on a research drone scan. Not frenzied, not chaotic, coordinated. The boy had not just learned from the jungle, he had taught it. Down in the valley, humans scrambled. Floodlights swung wildly. Orders barked through radios. Weapons raised too late. The herd broke through the fencing like it was paper. Sirens shrieked, but no one was listening anymore. The boy walked into the valley, calm, centered. Around him, chaos surged, but none of it touched him. Even the great king, blood crusting along his flank, moved with a dignity that stopped attackers in their tracks. The boy passed a soldier who had frozen in place, rifle dangling at his side, mouth half open. Their eyes met. The soldier took a step back, breath catching. He had seen a child, but not a child. He had seen power in a shape that didn't make sense. He didn't raise the rifle again. The boy moved on. He had only one destination. The central tower, the beating heart of this artificial intrusion. It rose like a spear, steel and glass and arrogance. He reached the main doors, palm flat against the scanner, and waited. The machine blinked. Rejected. He stepped back. Behind him, the king approached, towering, breathing heavy. The door slid open without further argument. Inside, the air was sterile, thick with recycled breath and fluorescent light. Monitors lined the walls. Data scrolled endlessly. Weather, seismic shifts, species migration. All numbers. All meaningless. A man stepped forward. Older, face lined with purpose. He wore a white coat and a badge that caught the light. "You," he said, recognition flickering in his eyes. The boy didn't reply. "They said you died." He didn't move. The man looked past him, at the shadow filling the hallway behind. His voice trembled. "You brought that here?" The boy tilted his head. Not confusion, calculation. "They'll send more," the man said. "You think you've won something, but they'll come. Governments. Private corps. They'll never stop. The boy stepped forward. Slowly. His voice, when he used it, was gravel through rusted gears. He had not spoken aloud in years. They will learn. And with that, he turned, stepping away from a world he no longer belonged to, leaving only silence and shattered screens behind him. The jungle, already reclaiming the valley, waited to embrace its champion. But the storm had only begun.